What if I told you that one of the most powerful mysteries of the universe has been sitting quietly in your hands since childhood and you never truly saw it? Long before you understood science, before you ever heard words like force or energy, something extraordinary was already unfolding right in front of you. You didn't question it back then. You didn't need explanations or theories. You simply experienced the world as it was, raw and immediate. And in that early stage of life, that was enough. Somewhere in those moments, you came across something small and simple, a magnet. Maybe it was stuck to a refrigerator door. Maybe it was part of a toy set. Or maybe it was something a teacher casually held up in class. You picked it up without thinking much about it, driven by the natural curiosity that defines every child. Then you brought it close to something metallic. And suddenly, it moved. It pulled. It connected. Not because you pushed it, not because you forced anything to happen, but because something invisible made it happen. That moment mattered more than you realized. You couldn't see anything traveling between the magnet and the metal. There were no wires, no strings, no visible connection at all, just empty space. And yet, something was clearly there. Something real. Something strong enough to move objects without touching them. And in that quiet instant, whether you remember it clearly or not, you felt something. A sense of wonder. A silent surprise. A kind of excitement that didn't need words. That was curiosity in its purest form. As a child, you didn't try to break it down or explain it. You didn't stop and analyze the mechanism behind it. You simply reacted. Maybe you smiled. Maybe you tried it again, just to make sure it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe you showed it to someone else, eager to share that strange, invisible connection. You played with it, again and again, not because you understood it, but because you didn't. And that made it powerful. It made the world feel bigger than what you could see. It hinted that reality wasn't limited to what your eyes could capture. And that's where every real journey of understanding begins, not with formulas or definitions, but with a feeling. A moment where something doesn't fully make sense, and instead of rejecting it, you lean into it. But then something changed. As time passed, life became faster. You grew older. You started learning rules, systems, and definitions. You were told how things work, what to memorize, what to believe. And slowly, without even noticing, that pure sense of wonder began to fade. The same magnet that once amazed you became ordinary, predictable, expected. You stopped asking why. You stopped feeling that quiet surprise. And little by little, the world began to feel smaller, more controlled, less mysterious. But here's the truth. What you felt back then was not wrong. It wasn't naive. It wasn't something you were supposed to outgrow. In fact, it was the most honest response you've ever had to reality. Because the world is not simple. It is not obvious. And it is definitely not limited to what you can see or touch. That small magnet was never just a toy. It was a doorway. A glimpse into something deeper, something hidden that exists, whether you notice it or not. And that feeling you had, that quiet curiosity, that was your mind recognizing that there is more to this world than meets the eye. You didn't have the words for it then. You didn't need them. Because the most powerful understanding doesn't begin with knowledge, it begins with awareness. And even now, no matter how much time has passed, that awareness is still inside you, waiting for you to slow down, waiting for you to look at something simple and see it differently again. Because the truth is the magic never left. The magnet is still doing exactly what it was doing the first time you held it. That invisible force is still there, still acting across space, still defying what should feel possible. The only thing that changed is how you see it. And the moment you allow yourself to feel that curiosity again, everything begins to shift. You reconnect with something deeper, not just knowledge, but awareness. Not just answers, but better questions. Because everything begins there. With a simple moment, a small object, an invisible force that once made you stop and feel something you couldn't explain. And this is where things start to get interesting, because at some point, without even realizing it, you stopped asking questions. And in the next part, we're going to uncover exactly why. Stay with me, because what you're about to see will change how you look at the simplest things forever. At some point, without even noticing it, you stopped asking questions. Not because you had found all the answers, but because the world quietly convinced you that you didn't need to ask anymore. Every day, you watch things happen around you. The sun rises, objects fall, lights turn on, magnets pull. And slowly, these events stopped feeling strange. They became routine, expected, Ordinary. And once something feels ordinary, your mind stops paying attention to it. Magnets became one of those things. You see a magnet stick to metal, and your thoughts don't pause. There's no moment of curiosity, no sense of mystery. Your brain immediately responds with, "That's just how it works," and then moves on. But pause for a second and really think about that. How does it work? Not the quick answer you were given in school. Not the simplified version that feels complete, but only scratches the surface. The real explanation. The deeper reason behind that invisible pull. Because something is happening there and it's far from obvious. A force is acting across space. No contact, no visible link, nothing you can point to or directly observe. And yet, the effect is real, strong, measurable, undeniable. So why didn't you stop and question it? Why didn't you look at that moment and ask, how is this even possible? Because somewhere along the way, you were trained not to. You were taught to accept instead of explore, to memorize instead of question, to move forward instead of pausing and reflecting. And over time, that habit became automatic. You stopped noticing the mystery in everyday things. But the mystery never went away. It was always there, just hidden behind familiarity. Every time a magnet pulls a piece of metal, something extraordinary is taking place. Not ordinary, not simple, extraordinary, but because it happens so often, your mind filters it out. It labels it as normal and moves on. And that's the real trap. Familiarity makes things invisible. The more you see something, the less you think about it. The less you question it, the less you realize how strange it actually is. You become blind to the very thing that should make you curious. Now imagine this. Imagine seeing a magnet for the very first time today. You pick it up, you bring it close to a piece of metal, and suddenly, without touching it, the metal moves toward it. What would you feel? You wouldn't call it normal. You wouldn't ignore it. You'd be surprised, curious, maybe even confused. Questions would immediately start forming in your mind. What is this force? How can it act without contact? What is happening in that empty space? That reaction, that pure curiosity, is the correct response, because reality is not as simple as it looks. Even right now, there are forces around you acting in ways you cannot see, in ways you don't fully understand. And just because they are part of your daily life doesn't make them simple. It only means you've stopped paying attention. And that's what this moment is really about. It's about waking that curiosity back up. It's about looking at something you thought you understood and realizing you don't, not completely. Because the moment you start asking again, everything begins to change. The world becomes deeper, more layered, more alive. You start seeing complexity where you once saw simplicity. That same curiosity you had as a child comes back, but now it's stronger, sharper, more focused. And suddenly, the question becomes unavoidable. What is actually happening behind that invisible pull? What kind of me? What if the problem was never the magnet, but the way you were taught to think about it? You've been told your entire life that magnets are simple. They attract metal, they repel each other, they just work. And at some point, you accepted that explanation and moved on. You placed it into that quiet category in your mind labeled, things I don't need to question. But that belief, comfortable as it is, might be completely wrong. Because magnetism is not simple. It only feels simple because you've seen it so many times that your brain stopped reacting to it. That sense of familiarity tricks you into thinking you understand it. But repetition doesn't make something basic, it just makes it feel that way. And magnetism is anything but basic. In fact, if you stop and really think about it, it becomes deeply unsettling. Everything you've learned about how the world works is built on a simple idea. Objects move when something touches them. You push something, it moves. You pull something, it follows. There's always contact, there's always a visible cause behind the motion. That's how your intuition understands reality. But a magnet breaks that rule completely. It doesn't touch, it doesn't connect in any visible way. It reaches across empty space and changes the motion of another object as if something invisible is linking them together. And your mind tries to simplify it. It says, it's just a force. But what does that actually mean? What is a force you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot directly observe, and yet it's strong enough to move physical matter? The more you think about it, the more that simple explanation begins to fall apart. Because this isn't just unusual, it challenges your entire definition of how reality works. You've been trained to think in terms of physical interactions. Things collide, things push, energy transfers through contact. That's the model your brain uses to make sense of the world. But magnetism doesn't follow that model. It exists outside of it. And that's where the real shift begins. Because once you recognize that something as common as a magnet doesn't behave the way your intuition expects, you're forced to ask a much bigger question. What else have you accepted without truly understanding? What else feels obvious but isn't? Because the truth is, the world is not built on simple, visible interactions. It's built on layers of hidden processes, invisible structures, rules that don't match your everyday experience. Magnetism is just one of the first cracks in that illusion. It shows you that what you see is only a fraction of what's actually happening. That behind every simple effect, there may be something incredibly complex and completely unexpected. And this is where things become exciting, because the moment your assumptions begin to break, your mind opens. You stop taking things for granted. You stop accepting easy answers. You begin to look deeper, think harder, question more, and suddenly, the world is no longer flat or predictable. It becomes alive again. That same magnet you once ignored now feels different. It's no longer just an object, it's a clue, a signal pointing towards something you don't fully understand yet. And that feeling slightly uncomfortable, but deeply curious, is exactly where discovery begins. Because real understanding doesn't come from accepting what you're told. It comes from challenging it, from looking at something familiar and saying, this doesn't fully make sense. And then having the courage to follow that thought, even when it leads you somewhere strange. Because the deeper you go, the less intuitive everything becomes. The rules begin to change. The logic shifts. Reality starts behaving in ways that don't match your expectations. And magnetism is one of the first clear signs of that hidden complexity. It's not just a simple force. It's not just something that pulls metal. It's a reminder that reality is far more intricate and far more mysterious than you've been led to believe. And the moment you truly accept that, something inside you changes. You begin to see the world differently. Not as a collection of simple, predictable events, but as a system of hidden interactions, constantly unfolding beneath the surface. And just when you start to grasp that idea, something even more surprising emerges. Because the truth is, this invisible force you've been ignoring is only one small part of a much larger hidden world. A world you are standing in right now. A world filled with forces you cannot see. And in the next part, you're going to step directly into it. So stay with me, because once you begin to understand what's happening around you at this very moment, there's no going back to seeing things the same way again. Mechanism allows something to act across empty space. What hidden structure of reality makes this possible? Because this isn't just about magnets. It's about how you see the world. Do you accept things as they appear, or do you challenge them? Do you settle for easy answers, or do you search for deeper truth? Because the answers do exist. The explanations are out there, but they don't reveal themselves to a passive mind. They reveal themselves to someone willing to question even when the world tells them not to. And the moment you choose to question again, you step into a completely different way of thinking. A way where nothing is truly ordinary. A way where even the simplest object can lead you to the deepest truths of the universe. You've been told your whole life that magnets are simple, that they just attract metal, that there's nothing more to it. But what if that belief is wrong? What if magnetism isn't simple at all? What if everything you assumed about it is only the surface of something much deeper? Because once you start thinking this way, something begins to shift. Right now, as you sit there watching this, something is happening all around you and you cannot see any of it. Not because it's hidden behind walls, not because it's too far away, but because your senses were never designed to detect it in the first place. You are surrounded by invisible activity. Forces moving silently, interactions happening constantly, fields stretching through space, influencing everything around you, and yet your eyes show you none of it. Your hands don't feel it directly. Your ears don't hear it. So your mind does what it always does. It assumes that what you see is all there is. But that assumption is where the misunderstanding begins. Because reality does not depend on your ability to perceive it. It operates on levels far beyond your senses. It moves, interacts, and shapes everything around you, even when you are completely unaware of it. And magnetism is one of the clearest signs that this hidden layer exists. When a magnet pulls a piece of metal, something is happening in the space between them. Something real, something active. But to you, that space looks empty. And that's the illusion. You see emptiness, but emptiness is not empty. You see stillness, but stillness is not still. That space is filled with fields, forces, and interactions that you cannot directly observe. They move through space, shaping outcomes, influencing motion, controlling behavior, and you walk through this invisible structure every single day without noticing it. Now pause and really take that in. Every step you take, every object you touch, every movement you observe is influenced by things you cannot see. Forces that exist whether you acknowledge them or not. Systems that operate continuously, silently, without asking for your attention. Magnetism is just one example of that. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists and acts. And that quiet presence is exactly what makes it so powerful. Because it reveals something deeper. It shows you that the universe is not built only on what is visible. It is built on what is hidden. And once that idea truly settles in your mind, something begins to shift. You stop trusting your senses as the final authority. You stop believing that seeing something means understanding it, and you begin to ask a new kind of question. What lies beneath what I observe? Because if something as real as magnetism can exist completely invisible, then what else is out there? What other forces are shaping your world right now without you realizing it? What other interactions are happening beyond your awareness, quietly influencing everything you see? These are not small questions. They take you beyond surface-level thinking and into something much deeper. Because the moment you accept that reality extends beyond your senses, you unlock a completely different way of understanding the world. You stop being limited by what feels obvious. You start exploring what is hidden, and that's where real understanding begins. Because the truth is, the most important parts of reality are often the ones you cannot see. They are not loud. They are not obvious. They don't reveal themselves easily. But they are always there working, shaping, controlling outcomes in ways that seem almost impossible when you first begin to grasp them. And magnetism is your first real glimpse into that invisible structure. It's a reminder that space is not empty, that forces can act without contact, that reality is layered far beyond what your senses can capture. And the more you allow yourself to think this way, the more your perspective expands. The world stops feeling limited. It becomes vast. It stretches beyond what your eyes can show you, beyond what your hands can touch, beyond what your mind once believed was possible. Because once you begin to understand the invisible, even without actually seeing it, you realize something powerful. Reality is not defined by your senses. It is defined by something deeper, something hidden, something that has been there all along, quietly shaping everything while you were only looking at the surface. And then something else happens. Your curiosity evolves. It's no longer just about noticing strange things. It becomes a need to understand them, a need to go deeper, to move beyond simple explanations, to search for real answers. Because eventually, curiosity alone is not enough. At some point, the questions become too big to answer on your own. And that's where something unexpected enters the picture. Because to truly understand what's happening, you need to hear from those who have spent their lives exploring these exact mysteries. People who didn't stop at the surface. People who went deeper than most ever dare to go. And in the next part, you're going to meet one of those minds and see magnetism in a way you've never seen it before. So don't stop now, because what comes next will completely reshape how you understand not just magnets, but reality itself. A point where the questions become sharper, deeper, more demanding. Where simple explanations stop satisfying you. Where you realize that if you truly want to understand what's happening, you need more than observation. You need insight from someone who has spent years, even decades, exploring these mysteries, because not every truth reveals itself easily. Some require time, study, a willingness to move beyond what feels comfortable, beyond what seems obvious, beyond what even feels possible. And this is where experience becomes powerful. For more than half a century, physicists have been trying to understand the true nature of reality. Not just what we see, but what lies beneath it. Not just how things behave, but why they behave that way. And among those who have gone deeper than most is Leonard Susskind. This is someone who has spent decades questioning the foundations of the universe, teaching, researching, and uncovering ideas that don't simplify reality but reveal just how strange and intricate it truly is. So when someone like him talks about something as simple as a magnet, it's worth paying attention. Because he doesn't see what you see. Where you see a small object sticking to metal, he sees a doorway into quantum reality. Where you see a basic force, he sees one of the deepest consequences of the laws that govern existence itself. And that difference in perspective changes everything. It reminds you that understanding is not about what you look at, it's about how deeply you're willing to see. Most people stop at the surface. They accept what feels obvious and move on. And that's fine if you're not searching for anything more. But if you are, if something inside you wants to go deeper, Then you have to approach things differently. You have to slow down. You have to question more. You have to accept that the truth might not be simple. And that's exactly what makes it powerful. Because when someone with decades of experience tells you that magnetism is not intuitive, that it's deeply strange, even at the highest levels of physics, it should make you pause. It should make you realize that there is something here far beyond what you were taught. And this is where the real shift happens. Instead of seeing magnets as everyday objects, you begin to see them as clues, as signals pointing towards something much larger, pieces of a puzzle that you've only just begun to notice. You start to understand that behind every simple effect, there is a deeper cause. And sometimes that cause is not easy to grasp. Sometimes it challenges everything you think you know. Sometimes it forces you to accept ideas that feel uncomfortable, almost impossible at first. But that's exactly where growth happens. Because real understanding isn't comfortable. It stretches your thinking. It pushes your limits. It forces you to let go of old assumptions and step into something new. And when you follow the path laid out by those who have gone deeper, those who have dedicated their lives to these questions, you begin to see reality differently. You realize that the world is not built on simple answers. It's built on layers of complexity, hidden structures, fundamental principles that take time and effort to even begin to understand. And that realization isn't discouraging, it's exciting. Because it means there's more to discover, more to learn, more to explore. It means that even the smallest object in your hand can connect you to something vast and profound. And when you begin to see the world through that lens, everything changes. Your curiosity sharpens. Your thinking deepens. Your perspective widens. You're no longer just observing the world, you're starting to understand it. But here's where things take an unexpected turn. Because just when you think you're getting closer to an answer, the complexity doesn't shrink, it expands. You start with a magnet, and suddenly you're talking about electrons. You start with a simple pull, and suddenly you're dealing with properties you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot even fully imagine in the way you're used to thinking. You move from the visible into the invisible, from the familiar into the unknown. And this is where the journey truly begins. Because the deeper you go, the less intuitive everything becomes. The rules change. The logic shifts. Reality starts behaving in ways that don't match your everyday experience. At first, this can feel overwhelming. Your mind wants clarity. It wants quick answers. It wants things to make sense immediately. But the truth doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, understanding requires you to sit with uncertainty, to keep moving forward even when things don't fully click yet. And that's the challenge. But it's also the opportunity. Because the moment you push past that discomfort, when you choose curiosity over confusion, something incredible happens. You start to see connections. You begin to realize that the magnet in your hand is not isolated. It's part of something much bigger. A system that connects to the smallest building blocks of matter and to the deepest laws that govern everything. And that realization changes everything. Because now, you're not just looking at a simple object. You're looking at a gateway into ideas that stretch far beyond what you thought was possible. And in the next part, that gateway opens, completely changing not just how you understand magnets, but how you see reality itself. So stay with me, because what comes next is where everything finally comes together, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it.